Today, I will continue the series of utopian stories. In light of recent events, probably every second person understands that our modern world is logical, perfect, and overflowing with kindness. And so I'm going to tell you about another utopian world that has neither kindness nor logic. I will touch upon a very delicate topic, and therefore I will immediately state, everything I'm going to tell you today, I strongly condemn and disapprove. So, let's get started. And I will tell you about one very interesting phenomenon that is present only in our species. There are many species of plants and animals on Earth, but only in human society a ban on marriage between close and distant relatives is applied. Yes, it is also necessary to clarify here. The ban is generally widely supported in more or less developed countries, i.e. in Europe, North America, Australia and the like. In India, the situation is a little different. In southern India, more than 52% of marriages are between cousins and second cousins. In 1968th year in Turkey, 27% of marriages were concluded between close relatives. In other words, the situation in the world is ambiguous. In some countries, the creation of marriages between relatives is not condemned, while others are seriously condemned. I will not touch on the moral side of this phenomenon, because morality in utopia is a dark matter. Today she is alone, and tomorrow a new order will come, and the old morality will already become the subject of censure. So here is the situation with marriages between relatives in all different countries. But the whole world doesn't really interest us. Most of the viewers are interested in the life of the countries of the Anglo-Saxon utopia. After all, it is this utopia that has determined our laws, customs, rituals, and even food for the last 200 years. It may be, of course, longer, but I have not found reliable information about what happened in the 18th century. The 19th century is, of course, also a circus with horses. Well, some grains of reliable information from the 19th century can still be scratched out. So, we all obey the laws and rules of the Anglo-Saxon utopia. And according to these laws, marriages between close and distant relatives are condemned and suppressed in every possible way. It all seems to be done for a good purpose, so that the human race does not die out due to genetic diseases. According to the creators of the Anglo-Saxon world, marriages between relatives lead to genetic mutations, which in turn leads to the birth of unhealthy offspring, which in turn leads to the degeneration of times. At first glance, the rulers of utopia organized everything correctly. And by prohibiting intermarriage, they simply care about the health of the nation. So it is, but what is strange is that the royal families of Europe, for some reason, do not follow these logical rules. For some reason, they are not afraid of genetic diseases, they are not afraid of the appearance of offspring with strong genetic deformities. That is, ordinary residents of utopia are not recommended intermarriage, but for some reason, royal families are allowed. And not only are they allowed, all the newspapers have been talking about these incestuous marriages for 200 years. It's kind of weird. It seems that the laws of genetics should act equally on kings and slaves. But for some reason, all slaves know that marriages between relatives lead to genetic abnormalities. But members of the royal family do not realize this and risk their health, they marry only with relatives. And that's what's weird. No anomalies have been seen for 200 years. In other words, marriages should lead to mutations. But if you look at the gossip columns, there is no birth in royal families. The only horror story we were told about was the story of the transmission of hemophilia from Queen Victoria to members of other royal houses. The story, of course, is loud and seems to confirm the danger of intermarriage, because 10 people died as a result. Prince Friedrich of Gessen, Prince Leopold, Prince Heinrich Friedrich of Prussia, Prince Maurice of Battenberg, Tsarevich Alexei. Lord Leopold of Mountbatten, Prince Rupert of Tesco, Infante Gonzalo of Spain, Alfonso Prince of Asturias, and, finally, Prince Voldemar of Prussia. That is, 10 people have died in 200 years. The British Queen has many hundreds of relatives. Only 10 people died from genetic transmissible diseases. And that's over 200 years. There are simply no other stories about any diseases of the royal families that would show terrible genetic deformities. That is, the ruling elite tells the slaves that marriages between relatives lead to genetic deformity. But at the same time, all the royal families of Europe are one family where all relatives and all conclude intermarriage. And for some reason they do not degenerate. For some reason, there are no mutations in the royal families. There are also no serious scientific papers on this topic. In other words, we are told that marriages between relatives are bad and lead to genetic mutations. But for some reason, there is no serious scientific confirmation of this. Scientific works on breeding prove just the opposite. From the point of view of genetics, closely related crossing leads to an acceleration of gene drift, that is, roughly speaking, it leads to an acceleration of evolution. Therefore, closely related crossing is the most common method of breeding when breeding new breeds of livestock, new varieties of wheat, fruits, and vegetables. That is, closely related crossbreeding has a good effect on cattle, wheat, fruits, and royal families. And for some reason, it only affects slaves badly. It seems that there are scientifically confirmed studies in the field of breeding which prove that closely related crossing does not lead to any genetic diseases. This is also confirmed by the European royal family by personal example. By the way, hemophilia, Queen Victoria has disappeared somewhere from the royal family tree. And it does not occur in the new offspring of the ruling race. So, scientific work on breeding, the life of the royal family, and even the Bible says one thing. Closely related crossbreeding does not lead to any unhealthy mutations. Rather, on the contrary, it leads to an improvement in appearance. That is, it helps the royal family, but for some reason, it does not help ordinary citizens or slaves. But this is very strange. For example, Iceland. Most of the 300,000 people are descendants of several groups of Vikings. Iceland's populations are genetically homogeneous, meaning almost all Icelanders. These are relatives of varying degrees. And so that an Icelander does not accidentally marry a very close relative, the company Decet Genetics has released an application based on DNA tests. So the inhabitants of Iceland are in fact members of the same family, but for some reason. I have not read anywhere about mass genetic abnormalities in Islamists. Also, the Old Testament quite calmly describes very strange things, if you look at it from the point of view of modern morality. Cain's wife was his sister. Siv also married his sister. Abraham's wife was his half-sister. Yaakov married his cousin. Lot lived in a cave with his daughters, and they bore him sons. In other words, if we admit that the Bible is a reliable source of information, and it tells us about the birth of modern humanity, it turns out that at the first stage of the settlement of the earth, no one saw anything wrong with closely related crossing. And for some reason, this did not lead to the degeneration of the human species due to the inevitable genetic diseases. Rather, on the contrary, the human race grew exponentially. And if we recall the strange long life of the first prophets, it turns out that this closely related crossing did not shorten life expectancy, but only increased it. Then came the New Testament, which condemned what Lot and others did. Closely related marriages were condemned, and in which no one has described centenarians living 400s of years. In short, I condemn everything I've told you here. But I'm still wondering, what is the real life expectancy of real members of the royal family? Do they have a difference in DNA, and where they disappear after the official death? That's it. Watch my channel.